Hello and welcome to the video on most common APA mistakes. And the information presented in this video comes from grading a number of papers for the master's and doctoral program. And these are the most common mistakes that students make on a regular basis. And I am hoping that by watching this, it will be helpful to you so that you don't make those same mistakes. First thing I'm going to say to you is that right now, all of our writing of materials and all of our grading of your papers is based on the 7th edition of the publication manual of the APA. So I realize that this is an expense, but because you're in a doctoral program or a master's program, you're going to use this publication manual. So I'm going to say to you, get it, use it, and learn things from it. I know that there are websites that tell you that they will give you the correct APA format and all you have to do is input your material, but those are not accurate and they're not as up to date as the publication manual. So once again, what you want to use is the publication manual itself. We're going to start off right at the very beginning, and that is what the title page should look like. So if you're going, you would use a title page in your work, and let me point out some particulars for you in that title page. The first thing is that there is a running head. Keep in mind that using a running head on the title page is optional, and it exists based on the instructor's preference. And so I'm telling you right now that this instructor's preference is that you use the running head, and that's GSA in schools, which is at the top of the page. It also has the page number, and you can set that so that it doesn't do page one, show page one, but again, that's acceptable. Now we move down to the title. The title should be in bold, as you can see here, and then there should be 2 spaces, then the student's name. Then immediately following the student's name is what your affiliation is. And your affiliation in this case is the Department of Educational Leadership in Ball State University, and then list the course for which this paper is being presented and the date. The next thing is if you use an abstract. Now for most of the research papers and shorter papers that you write from me, it's not necessary to do an abstract. If you're going to do a 10 to 12 page paper, 8 to 10 page paper, either way, then an abstract is acceptable. But keep in mind, if you do use an abstract, and I'm not requiring them, it should be on its own page. Nothing else is on the page but the abstract. It should be less than 250 words, and it should have a very simple title which just says abstract. You do not have to repeat the title of your paper. What should the paper look like? When you're talking about the body of the paper, you're going to have your pages numbered. Now, if you notice on this particular example, pages are numbered at the bottom. You can either put them at the top as a part of the running head or at the bottom, and that's entirely up to you. Everything in your paper is double spaced. I'm going to repeat that because a lot of people get confused on 2 particular things. One is when you're doing a longer quote that's more than 40 words, and in your references page. But everything in your paper should be double spaced, including longer quotes and your references page. Use the same font throughout. Here's where I run into difficulty with students sometimes. If you happen to have quoted from another source and you're doing a cut and paste of that particular quote, make sure that you match the style of the paper that you are writing, which will be, again, Times New Roman 12 point. You should have a 1-inch margin all the way around. I know I have had students who have thought, okay, I have a whole lot more content and the paper is restricted. It can't be any more than 10 pages. So I will use the narrow setting on the margin. APA format says use the 1-inch margin. You should align it to the left, and the right margin is uneven. You indent at the beginning of each paragraph 0.5 inches or half an inch. Now, one thing that's a major change in APA 7, and that is that following major punctuation, you no longer have the 2 spaces like we're accustomed to, but now you just have one space after major punctuation. If you include tables, charts, or graphs, make sure you give them a name and talk about them in the body of your work. And by saying that, as you're writing along, you're going to say, in table 1, then you talk about what happened. We find the percent by ethnicity in Indiana based on choice scholarship schools. All right, so you give a title to your graph or your chart or whatever, and then you refer to it by that. If it's a chart, you say in chart 1 we see, or in table 1. You don't need to give that title of the chart at that point, but you do need to refer to the table as table 1 or table 2, because it doesn't always line up. It may not always be on the same page. Now, how about crediting the works that are in the that you're using in your paper? Understand that all of what I'm going to say to you right now comes directly from Chapter 8 of the 7th edition of the APA Publication Manual. And I encourage you to spend some time in Chapter 8, because that's where you're going to find all the details about how you provide credit. Understand that the biggest issue in regard to using quotes is the issue of plagiarism. And plagiarism is a big deal. It's a huge deal. And in fact, in every paper that you submit from me, it will be run through a program called VeriCite. And VeriCite will check to see how many things that you quote are direct quotes from some other source. When I get the report, when I'm grading it, I will see the same thing you see, which is either a blue tag, which means there are 0 improperly quoted things, green, which is up to a certain percentage, and you do green is still acceptable. Then you'll have yellow, which means that you have included several things that are direct quotes from somewhere else and you've not given proper attribution to those quotes. If it gets to red or orange, then you know that you have really, you have a problem. So you need to resubmit. If the particular submission on Canvas does not allow you to resubmit a second one, what you need to do at that point is send me an email and say, look, I messed up. When I ran it through VeriCite, I realized I'd failed to give credit. So I need to resubmit. And what I will do is go in and remove your submission or allow multiple submissions. There are 2 forms of plagiarism that will get you in a lot of trouble, both at Ball State and at most universities. The first is taking credit for something somebody else wrote. That means from a published author, a published story, a published article. So anything that is in quotes, and you see this on the side there, you have to give, you put it in quotes, you put where it came from, what the year was, and what page. That page number is very important, because I should be able to go back as the instructor. If I say, hey, I really like that quote, I want to go look at the original story, I'm going to go back to the original article, and I'm going to go to that page number, and then I'm going to find out how to do that. Now, the question some people ask is, what happens then if I'm on a web page and it doesn't give, like a journal article, a real page number? Then if you follow again in Chapter 8 in the APA manual, it will tell you that you can count the number of paragraphs and that you can assign paragraph 17, paragraph 18, or whatever in that article. The other form of plagiarism is something that you have already written yourself and you've submitted for another course. If you quote that without saying that it's a quote, then that is also plagiarism. I know the question is, how can it possibly be plagiarism when I'm the one who wrote it? Because of the fact that if you have submitted that work already for another course, then it is considered plagiarism to use it for the course that you're currently involved in. So give credit where credit is due. Now, one of the things that you don't really want to do, remember in a research paper, I am looking for what you know and what you've learned. So please don't just include a whole bunch of quotes and a whole bunch of long quotes, and that's a very technical term, whole bunch. What you want to be able to do is look at your paper, and I should not be able to see, as soon as I get your paper, see a whole selection of indented material because you've had quotes that are 40 words or longer. And we'll talk about that in the next slide. But what you want to do is learn to summarize what other people have said. Still give them credit. Look at the example that's given here. Swenson, Ellis, and Schaefer, 2018, discussed the ideas that led to the creation of the Choice Scholarship Program in Indiana. And in this case, even though it wasn't a direct quote, I included the page numbers. You do not have to include the page numbers there as long as you attribute where you got the information from. If it's unique information, you cannot lay claim to it yourself. So, when we look at what about quotes that are shorter than 40 words? If it's less than 40 words, and that's the critical number there, if it's less than 40 words, then you don't need any special formatting, except that if it's a direct quote, you're going to put the name of the person who wrote it, the year that it was written, and the page number. Anytime, and I'm emphasizing that, anytime you have a direct quote, then you have to provide a page number. What if it's a longer quote? All right, if it's longer, which is any quote that is 40 words or more. So if it's 39 words, you don't do this. If it's 40 words or more, then you follow this process. And look at the example that's given to you right here. Longer quotes must be indented a ½ inch as the whole paragraph, not just the beginning. And you don't use quotation marks, because by indenting it like that, it tells us that we know that you know it is a quote. And again, you should not have a whole lot of these in your paper. 1 or 2 max is probably about the most that we're looking for. Now, some other professors will tell you differently. They like long quotes. I like to know what you know about what you've read. So the only thing that you have to do is you indent the entire paragraph by ½ inch. No quotation marks. You use the author, the year, and the page number at the end. Now let's talk about spelling and grammar. I probably shouldn't have to say this. I should not have to say this at all. If you're a student who's going after a master's degree or an educational specialist or an educational doctorate, you should at this point have really developed a strong sense of good grammar and good spelling. But no matter what you're doing, almost every word processing program, whether you're using Word or Google Docs or whatever, is going to show you if you've misspelled a word or if they think there's a problem in your grammar. Follow those suggestions. Pay attention to those suggestions. It's really critical that you do not have a lot of grammatical errors in anything that you present. Now, what if you're really bad at doing that? Here's what I'm going to suggest to you. Find a friend, a critical friend, somebody who will examine your work carefully for spelling and grammar, and then let them go through that. There's nothing wrong with that as long as they're not writing the paper for you. But have them proofread it. If you need to do this on a regular basis, you might want to, I'm suggesting that you probably contract with somebody to get them to do that for you and pay them something. Remember, if you're reading a sentence out loud and it doesn't make sense to you, probably not going to make sense to me either, and I'm going to question you on it. And now, as Paul Harvey says, the rest of the story, the references page is probably the most common place where we get mistakes. And it's also the place where you really need to be very careful what you're doing. So, here's where I'm going to say, in this program, throughout this entire program, you will be using APA journal style. APA is the American Psychological Association. We're currently using the 7th edition. This is not MLA. Please do not format your references as MLA. It's not Reader's Digest and New York Times or your local newspaper, any of those kinds of things. Remember that the correct title for this page is references. Simple word, references. Not bibliography, not works cited, not sources, not resources. I don't care what you've used on every other paper you've ever written. For APA, the word is references. The word references always starts at the top of a new page. Always. It starts at the top of a new page. Even if you just have a line in completing a paragraph in the final part of your paper before the references start, it always starts at the top of a new page. It's always centered on the line the word references is. It's always in bold print, and it's the same size font as the rest of the paper. All right. 4 points down there at the bottom, and these are things that I will be looking for. It always starts at the top of a new page. It's always centered on the line. It's always in bold print, and it's always the same size font as the rest of the paper. Here's an example. Now, I am not looking at, in this course, the detail for your references as will be looked at as you get into your Lit Review and some other courses that you will be taking. But this is a basic idea of what it should look like. Remember that you have to look at chapters 9 and 10 in the 7th edition, and they give you all the details of how you do the referencing so that you get the names correct, the title of the work correct, the location where you can find it. I love the fact that most articles are available online, because if I wonder what you've said and I start questioning, okay, what exactly is this supposed to mean? Then I'm going to follow the link in your references and I'm going to check out what the author originally said. Important things to note on your references page. And as I'm doing this, I'm seeing that the example that's given to you, the word references at the top of the page is not in bold print, and it should be. So keep that in mind. We've already talked about that. You will use a hanging indent, and you can see very clearly what that means. Your first line is left aligned, and then everything that follows that is ½ inch in. Everything is double spaced. Now, a new thing as of the 7th edition, you do not include the city of the publisher. That's a new one. You may see that in some places on this particular one. However, you do not currently use the state or the city of the publisher. And you do alphabetical order based on the author's name. If there is no author, follow the directions that are given to you in chapter 9 and 10. This is the end of our presentation on APA mistakes and how to avoid them. I trust that this has been useful to you, and I hope that at this point in time you will take this to heart and put this information to good work so that you don't have a problem with that.